You know, imagine for a second that you are reading this massive, sprawling, like, 1,000-page novel.
Right, like one of those huge fantasy epics.
Exactly. It's the kind of book with just dozens of characters and overlapping timelines and these side quests that just seem to lead absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, the ones where you need a glossary just to keep track of who's who.
Right. But the catch here is you haven't actually been reading it straight through. You've just been sort of skipping around.
Oh, wow. Okay, that sounds confusing.
It is. You read a few isolated chapters from the beginning. Maybe you, like, skim some of the middle sections, and you think you have a decent grasp of the main characters, the general vibe.
But you're missing the connective tissue.
Exactly. You're a bit confused. Like, why did that one character make that bizarre decision? Or, why did the author spend 50 pages describing a seemingly irrelevant event?
Right, like why are we focusing on this random tree for 3 chapters?
Yes. But then, you finally hit that chapter, like that one specific chapter that contains the central plot twist. The aha moment.
Right, and as you read it, something incredible happens.
Yeah.
Suddenly, every single scattered thread, every confusing side plot, every weird character motivation, it all violently pulls tight.
Oh, I love that feeling.
The cognitive dissonance just vanishes. The entire book, retrospectively, makes absolute perfect sense.
It is, it's that singular moment where the chaos resolves into design, right?
Yeah.
You realize you weren't reading a disjointed collection of short stories.
No, not at all.
You were reading a single, unified, just brilliantly engineered masterpiece all along. Like the end was written right into the beginning.
Exactly. You feel that profound sense of, oh, I see what the author was doing this whole time.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that realization of an underlying master architecture is exactly what we are going after in this deep dive today.
Which is such an exciting premise.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are looking at a comprehensive manuscript, and it's accompanied by some incredibly detailed infographics put together by Chris Arvelasas.
Right. And it's titled 077, Messiah, the Arrival of the Promised King. And, the core mission of our conversation today is to explore this monumental idea presented in the text.
The idea that the arrival of the Messiah is the hinge on which the whole biblical story turns.
Yes, the hinge. We aren't just going to do, like, a dry biography of historical figure. We're going to really dig into the mechanics of how every single event before him actively leans toward him.
And how everything after him stands entirely because of him.
Right.
And I think we really need to emphasize why this matters to you, the listener, right out of the gate. Like, we aren't just analyzing ancient literature for the sake of it.
Definitely not.
The source material actually makes a very bold foundational claim here. It says Christianity rises or falls entirely on the identity of Jesus Christ.
Which is a massive claim to make.
It is. Because if he is not the Messiah, then what you have in the biblical text is just a tragic, centuries-long story of promises without any real fulfillment. It's a bridge to nowhere.
Yeah, just a collection of letdowns, really.
Exactly. But if he is the Messiah, the implications are staggering.
How so? Like, break that down for us.
Well, it means history actually has a meaning. It has a definitive center. It means human life is not just a random sequence of events, but it stands under the direct authority of a living king.
Wow.
Yeah. It takes this whole narrative out of the realm of abstract, private, internal religion and places it squarely in the middle of actual human history.
Okay, so if we want to really understand this arrival, where do we actually start? Because, my instinct is to just jump right into the manger scene.
Right, the classic Christmas story.
Yeah, exactly. Bethlehem, the star, the shepherds, all of that. But the text tells us that if we start there, we are already late to the story.
Way too late.
Right. To understand the arrival, we actually have to look at the blueprint first. We have to guide the timeline of human history all the way back, past the beginning of creation, and literally step into eternity.
Because the Messiah's story does not begin in human time.
No.
According to the text, it begins in the eternal counsel of God.
Which is wild to think about.
This is a crucial starting point, actually. And it's where the author really dismantles a lot of modern assumptions. Like, the source explicitly states that Jesus is not a reactive remedy to an unforeseen human disaster.
Which, let's be honest, is such a massive misconception. I think it is so deeply natural for people to view the Old Testament as plan A.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, the common thought process goes something like this. God creates the world. It's perfect. He gives humanity some basic rules. Humanity completely messes up those rules. The world breaks.
And then God panics.
Right. God looks down in a panic, sighs, and says, all right, plan A's a bust, bring in plan B, send in Jesus to clean up the mess.
The cosmic janitor theory.
Yes, it frames the Messiah as a cosmic janitor sent in to fix an emergency. But the text argues the exact opposite, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it backs this up by pointing directly to the scriptural architecture. If you look at the passages the author highlights, like John 1.13, Colossians 1.1617, and Hebrews 1.2.
Right, the really heavy theological hitters.
Exactly. They all point to this massive, mind-bending theological concept. Creation was made through and for the Son.
Through and for. That's a lot to unpack.
Let's really unpack the mechanism of that. If the universe was created for him, the profound implication here is that the incarnation, the concept of God becoming human flesh, is not an emergency measure.
It wasn't a panic button.
No, it wasn't a panic button pushed in heaven because things went off the rails. The world Jesus eventually enters in the first century is inherently his own world.
Wow.
The stage was built specifically for him to walk onto it.
Okay, here's where my mind goes with this, because I need a visual, you know?
Sure.
Think about a master architect who is designing this incredibly grand, massive stone archway.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Before they lay a single stone of the foundation in the dirt, before they even, sketch out the supporting columns, they design the keystone.
Right, the most important piece.
Exactly. That is that one wedge-shaped stone at the very top apex of the arch that ultimately locks all the other stones into position and allows the entire structure to actually bear weight.
Without it, the whole thing falls apart.
Right. And the keystone isn't a backup plan that the architects suddenly ordered because the walls started leaning halfway through construction.
No, of course not.
The entire structure from the very first foundation stone was conceived and built around the eventual placement of that specific keystone.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize what the source is arguing. The Messiah is the keystone of reality.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture for you listening right now, why does this abstract theological concept matter to your understanding of the universe?
Right, why should we care on a Tuesday morning?
Because it fundamentally alters how you view existence. It means that from the very beginning, before time even existed, the universe was infused with an intentional, unified design that is centered on redemption.
It wasn't an accident.
Exactly. The Messiah is not a late addition to the plan. He is the center of the plan from before time began. Right. It means your existence is caught up in a story that was meticulously plotted out, not one that is just being made up as we go along.
Right. But, that naturally leads to a massive question. I've got to push back here, or at least play the role of the confused listener.
Please do.
If the blueprint was absolutely perfect and this keystone was always the focal point of the design, then how exactly did the crisis emerge?
Right.
If this wasn't an accident, why did the Messiah have to step out of eternity and into time in such a dramatic, painful way? Because a perfectly built archway doesn't need rescuing, you know?
And that tension, that is exactly where the narrative moves from eternity into the gritty reality of history.
Okay.
The crisis wasn't a flaw in the blueprint. The crisis was the introduction of human rebellion. This brings us to the fall.
The famous apple in the garden, right?
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
The text outlines that the fall is not just about humans breaking an arbitrary rule about a piece of fruit.
Right, it's bigger than that.
It is fundamentally about a rupture. Human rebellion ruptures that initial, perfect communion with God. It deeply distorts the divine image that was stamped into humanity.
It breaks the mirror, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it introduces three devastating elements into the historical timeline: sin, death, and alienation.
Let's talk about that word, actually, alienation.
Yeah.
Because it implies a separation that isn't just physical, right?
Right.
It's relational and spiritual. The harmony of the design is completely fractured.
Exactly.
But what is wild to me and what the manuscript really draws attention to is how fast the response comes. The dust hasn't even settled on the ruins of Eden, and right amidst the absolute disaster, we get the first promise.
Yes. Genesis 3.15. It's often referred to in theological circles as the proto-evangelium.
Okay, time out. Proto-evangelium. That is a heavy academic word right there.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
Break that down for us. What is the actual mechanism at work in that verse?
Sure. It translates literally to the first gospel, or the first good news. It is the genetic seed from which the rest of the entire biblical narrative grows. In this verse, God is speaking to the serpent, the enemy. And he says that the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head, but the serpent will strike his heel.
It's a really brief statement.
It is remarkably brief,
Oh,
but the author highlights how incredibly decisive it is. It sets up the entire profile of the Messiah in three distinct parts.
okay. What are they?
First, the coming victor will be human. He is specifically called the seed of the woman.
Right.
Second, he will ultimately and completely defeat the enemy, like crushing the head is a fatal final blow.
But then there's the third part, which is the most intriguing and honestly the most troubling part of the promise.
Exactly. The victor will suffer in the conflict. His heel will be struck.
Wow.
It introduces this profound paradox right at the dawn of history. The ultimate victory will be achieved through the suffering of the victor.
So we have this genetic seed, this tiny compressed promise, but a seed has to grow. And the way it grows, according to the manuscript, is through this concept of covenants. Now, the word covenant gets thrown around a lot, usually meaning like a contract or a promise.
Yeah, like a lease agreement.
Exactly. But in the ancient world, it was so much bloodier and more binding than a modern contract.
Vastly more binding. A covenant in antiquity wasn't a handshake agreement you could just back out of if the terms no longer suited you.
You couldn't just hire a lawyer to find a loophole.
No, not at all. It was a life and death treaty, often sealed with blood, establishing a permanent relational bond.
Hmm.
When God makes a covenant, he is literally binding himself to human history and to human partners.
And the author meticulously traces the evolution of these covenants to show how that initial vague promise in Eden starts to take a very specific shape.
It gets much more detailed.
I always picture this evolution like a massive cosmic funnel.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. You start at the very top, the widest part of the funnel, which is all of humanity represented in Adam and Eve.
Right.
The promise is given to the seed of the woman, so that could theoretically be anyone in the human race. It's incredibly broad.
Wide open.
But then the funnel starts to narrow. God makes a covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12.
Okay.
He promises that through Abraham's specific family line, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So now the Savior isn't just a random human. He has to be an Israelite.
Right. The parameters are tightening. The profile's getting more specific.
Exactly. Then you fast forward centuries, and the funnel narrows even further. It goes from a whole nation to one specific tribe, the tribe of Judah. And then, with the covenant made with King David in 2 Samuel, it narrows down to one specific family bloodline. God promises David an eternal royal line, a throne that will never end.
So we've gone from all humanity to one family.
Yes. So the funnel keeps narrowing and narrowing, from humanity to a nation, to a tribe, to a family, until it points down to a single, hyper-specific, one specific king. But the beautiful logic of this, the reason it narrows down to that one king, is so that the ultimate blessing can eventually pour back out the bottom of the funnel to cover the entire world.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
The narrowing is entirely for the purpose of a universal expansion later.
Right.
But, to get to that single point at the bottom of the funnel, the narrative has to slog through the deeply messy reality of human kingship.
Because it wasn't a smooth ride.
Not at all. The source material points out that having this promise attached to the throne of David forces Israel to endure the utter failure of human kings.
Yeah, they were pretty terrible, honestly.
If you look at David himself, he was chosen by God, anointed, a man after God's own heart, yet he was deeply flawed morally.
He abused his power.
Extensively. Then you have his son, Solomon, who's given unprecedented wisdom and wealth, but he compromised his reign with idolatry and disastrous foreign alliances.
Right.
And after them, it's just a steady, agonizing slide into corruption until the monarchy essentially collapses entirely.
Which culminates in the exile. And we really can't overstate the psychological devastation of the exile.
It is catastrophic.
The nation is completely conquered by Babylon. The temple, which is the literal physical dwelling place of God on earth, is burned to the ground.
Completely destroyed.
The royal line of David is dethroned, and the people are dragged off in chains to a foreign land. Like, if I am an Israelite living in exile, weeping by the rivers of Babylon, and the throne of David is empty, covered in ash,
Yeah.
I am 100% convinced the promise is dead. The covenant failed. The master architect made a massive mistake.
It certainly felt like the ultimate defeat. But the author makes a brilliant assertion here. This devastating collapse was not an accident.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was actually necessary to prove a theological point.
Okay, unpack that.
The utter failure of Israel's kings proved that something much deeper was needed than just a political restoration. If a human king was supposed to flawlessly represent God's rule on earth, The collapse of the monarchy proved that no mere human could possibly carry that weight. It was a structural impossibility.
The stone wasn't strong enough.
Exactly. A better king was required. They didn't just need a king who could inherit earthly power. They needed a king who actually embodied divine righteousness.
Okay, but how did the prophets, the guy's supposed to be speaking for God, how did they handle this massive letdown? Did they just pivot and say, well, the king thing didn't work out, let's try a democracy?
Not at all. And this is where the genius of the narrative really shines. The prophets didn't abandon the hope of a king. The text argues that the exile actually clarified their hope.
Interesting.
They took the expectation and they purified it.
How so?
They started introducing these rich, complex, and seemingly contradictory new layers to the profile of this coming Messiah.
Like what?
They prophesied that he wouldn't just be a political monarch. He would be a righteous branch springing from a dead stump. He would be a shepherd king who intimately cares for the flock, completely unlike the corrupt kings who just fed off the flock.
Right.
And crucially, most profoundly in the writings of the prophet Isaiah, we see the introduction of the suffering servant.
Which connects back to Genesis 3.
Exactly. The king will conquer, yes, but he will be pierced for our transgressions.
So the Old Testament creates this intense, centuries-long ache of expectation.
Yes, a deep longing.
It basically ends on a massive cliffhanger, leaving the listener with this incredibly complex, somewhat contradictory profile of who this Messiah is supposed to be.
It's a very tall order.
I mean, he has to be a conquering king, a suffering servant, divine, human, born of a specific bloodline meant for the whole world. It's a wildly demanding resume.
Very true.
So when we turn the page and the New Testament begins, when the promised king finally arrives in the Gospels, how does he actually fit this centuries-old, impossible profile?
The source dives right into the New Testament accounts to answer this, and it starts with the genealogies.
Oh, boy. Genealogies.
Right, I know. To a modern reader, genealogies can feel incredibly dry.
It's just a list of difficult-to-pronounce names, honestly.
Yeah, people usually just skip those chapters.
Yeah.
But the author points out that these are essentially theological resumes, and it's fascinating how each gospel writer deploys them to prove a specific point.
Okay, how so?
Well, take Matthew. Writing primarily to a Jewish audience, he opens his gospel by instantly connecting Jesus to Abraham and David.
Right, he is anchoring Jesus right into that legal covenant history we just traced. He's pointing directly at the bottom of the funnel and saying, look, this guy has the legal right to the throne.
Exactly. He's checking the legal boxes. Then you look at Luke.
What does Luke do?
Luke takes his genealogy all the way back, past David, past Abraham, and anchors it in Adam.
Huh.
By doing this, Luke connects Jesus to the whole of humanity, echoing that very first broad promise in Genesis 3. He isn't just the king of the Jews, he is the redeemer of the human race.
And then there's John.
Right, and John bypasses human history altogether.
He doesn't even bother with a human genealogy.
No, he connects Jesus straight back to eternity. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. John proves the divine origin.
And the text goes out of its way to point out that the virgin birth is not just some, incidental, flashy miracle designed to start the story off with a bang.
No, it has immense theological weight.
How does the text explain it?
Well, the virgin birth signifies divine initiative. It is the holy beginning of a new creation. By bypassing human generation, the eternal Son is entering the created order without the taint of the fallen nature we inherited from Adam.
He is a completely new starting point for humanity. So the resume checks out. The origin is correct. But then he actually begins his public ministry. And his opening message is incredibly specific. Mark 1:15. The time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand.
Such a loaded statement.
It is. And the author makes a really sharp point here. This isn't just the arrival of a new, hip religious teacher with some fresh moral insights on how to be a better person.
Right, he's not just a philosopher.
This is the announcement that the kingdom itself has arrived because the king is physically standing right there.
And this brings us to the miracles. The source stresses that we have to reevaluate how we view Jesus' miracles.
Like the healings and everything?
Yes, the healings, the exorcisms, his control over the wind and the waves.
Yeah.
These aren't just parlor tricks designed to draw a crowd or, prove he has superpowers.
Right, he's not putting on a magic show.
No, they are explicit signs of messianic authority. They are physical proof that the promised age is actively breaking into the present reality.
I want to pause here because the source uses a very specific, somewhat intimidating theological term for this.
Inaugurated eschatology.
Yes, inaugurated eschatology. Let's break that down because if you can understand this concept, the entire New Testament suddenly makes so much more sense.
Absolutely. Eschatology is just the study of the end times, the ultimate destiny of the world.
Okay.
Inaugurated means it has officially begun. So inaugurated eschatology means that the age to come, that promised future era of absolute peace, perfect justice, and total healing, has violently broken into the present age.
And there's a really good analogy for this, right?
Yes, a classic way to understand this mechanism is the difference between D-Day and VE Day in World War II.
Okay, lay that out for us.
D-Day was the decisive invasion. Once the beaches of Normandy were taken, the outcome of the war was practically guaranteed. The fatal blow was struck.
That is the inauguration.
Right. But the war wasn't completely over. There were still fierce battles to fight until VE Day, which was the final total victory.
Oh, that is a brilliant analogy. So the old age of sin and death is still actively fighting, but its defeat is guaranteed because the new age has already invaded.
Exactly. The two ages are currently overlapping.
Okay.
So when Jesus heals a man with leprosy, or casts out a demon, or raises a dead girl, he isn't just doing a nice thing for an individual.
He is establishing a beachhead.
Yes. He is establishing a localized, visible outpost of the age to come. He is giving us a preview of what the entire cosmos will look like when VE Day arrives, and his kingdom is fully consummated.
Right.
Sickness, demons, and death have no place in the age to come. So when the king encounters them in the present age, he banishes them.
Okay, that makes perfect sense conceptually. But I am going to play devil's advocate here for you, the listener, because we have to address the elephant in the room.
Bring it on.
If I am a first-century person living under the crushing iron boot of the Roman Empire, I am paying exorbitant taxes, my people are being crucified on the roadsides, and I am desperately waiting for this conquering king.
You want relief?
Yes. And then I look at Jesus of Nazareth. He honestly doesn't look like a king at all.
Not in the traditional sense, no.
He's a carpenter from a nowhere town called Nazareth. He absolutely refuses to raise an army. He doesn't wear a crown. He doesn't live in a palace.
Right.
He walks around the dusty roads with uneducated fishermen, and worse, he eats dinner with tax collectors, like the very people collaborating with the Roman oppressors.
It's a PR nightmare.
If I'm an Israelite, this feels like a terrible political strategy. How does the text reconcile this massive, glaring disconnect between the expectation of a conquering king and the deeply underwhelming reality of Jesus?
Well, that intense friction, that disconnect, is actually central to the narrative. The author spends time analyzing the very diverse Jewish expectations of the time, because everyone wanted the Messiah to fit into their specific preferred box.
What kind of boxes?
You had groups like the Zealots who were expecting a political liberator to violently overthrow Rome with a sword.
Right, the revolutionary.
Then you had the Pharisees expecting a figure of strict priestly purity who would enforce the law perfectly. You had the Essenes waiting out in the desert for a cosmic apocalyptic judgment to rain down literal fire on the wicked.
It's like everyone was projecting their own deepest desires onto the blank canvas of the Messiah.
Yes. And the text asserts that Jesus actually serves as a massive convergence point for all these hopes, but absolutely not in the triumphalist, earthly form any of them expected.
He didn't play their game.
He completely refuses to be reduced to a nationalist liberator. He refuses to take up the sword against Rome.
And why is that?
Because if he simply overthrew Rome, he would only be dealing with a symptom. His path to true glory, his method of truly conquering the actual underlying enemies of humanity, which are sin and death themselves, requires him to suffer first.
Right.
He has to deal with the root rot, not just trim the branches of the tree.
And that refusal to be a conventional sword-swinging king, that insistence on dealing with the root of the problem, leads us directly to the most shocking, scandalous, and paradoxical part of the Messiah's mission, the cross.
Yeah, if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, the cross is the ultimate subversion of all human expectations of power.
Completely.
The text points us back to that prophecy in Isaiah 52 and 53, the suffering servant. The prophet said the one who is highly exalted is also the one who is despised, rejected, and crushed.
And Jesus actively defines his own mission using this exact framework, right?
Yes, in Mark 10.45, he plainly states that he didn't come to be served like a normal king, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
I want to highlight something the source is incredibly emphatic about because it changes everything about how you read the New Testament.
What's that?
The cross is not a tragic detour.
No, not at all.
It's not a failure.
Yeah.
It's not a situation where Jesus tried his best to start a peaceful political revolution, got caught in the gears of the Roman justice system, was unfortunately executed, and so the early church had to hastily invent a spiritual reason to cover up the embarrassing failure.
That is a very popular secular theory, but it doesn't align with the text.
Right. The text argues that the cross was the target the whole time. The cross is actually the throne of the Messiah, just presented in a deeply humiliating form.
This raises a critical concept the author calls messianic logic. In the kingdom of the Messiah, the logic of the world is inverted. The king reigns by substitution. The righteous one voluntarily dies for the unrighteous.
Substitution.
Yes. The author points to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, where Paul explains the mechanism. Christ became a curse for us,
And why did he do that?
so that the blessing promised all the way back to Abraham could finally come to the nations. The cross is where the curse of the fall is finally born and exhausted. It is not a defeat. It is the precise mechanism of victory.
I always think of the cross like a divine Trojan horse.
Oh, I like that.
To the Romans, to the religious leaders of the day, to the whole watching world, the crucifixion looks like ultimate humiliating defeat. You take the leader of a movement, you strip him, torture him, nail him to a piece of wood, and he dies in agony. Game over.
Total failure from a worldly perspective.
Right. But inside that apparent defeat, inside that wooden structure, was the very mechanism God used to infiltrate and conquer sin and death from the inside.
Wow.
Death looked at Jesus on the cross, opened its mouth, and swallowed the author of life. But it couldn't digest him. The sheer density of his pure, divine life broke the system of death from within.
The Trojan horse is a brilliant way to frame it. The enemy thought they were executing their ultimate display of power, but they were actually pulling the mechanism of their own total defeat right through their front gates.
Exactly.
And that mechanism leads inevitably, necessarily, to the empty tomb. The resurrection, according to the text, is not just a heartwarming story about life after death.
Right. It's not just he lives on in our hearts.
No, it's not just a comforting thought that Jesus' spirit lives on. The author directs us to Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2 and the prophecy in Psalm 110. The resurrection is God the Father's absolute public vindication of Jesus.
Okay.
It is dripping with political and royal enthronement language.
Wait, enthronement language? Explain that. Because most people just view the resurrection as Jesus waking up from a coma and proving he's God.
It's so much more than that. By physically raising him from the dead, God the Father is publicly declaring to the cosmos, this is the true, legitimate king.
The coronation.
Yes, the resurrection is a coronation.
Yeah.
He is seated at the right hand of God, a position of ultimate authority. The Messiah has entered his royal dominion in a new, indestructible mode, and the text argues that all of human history now actively moves under his reign.
Wow. Okay. So we have just laid out this massive historical and narrative foundation. We've gone from eternity to the empty tomb.
Well, not ground covered.
But now the deep dive shifts. The source material takes all of this narrative history and synthesizes it into 6 core theological principles.
Right, the pillars.
These are essentially the load-bearing pillars that hold up this entire worldview. Let's explore these, and instead of just listing them off, let's really see how they flow into one another. Because the first major reality we have to grapple with is how Jesus acts as the ultimate point of fulfillment.
Right. We touched on this with the funnel analogy earlier.
Yeah.
But the text emphasizes that Jesus is the knot that gathers all the disparate, loose strands of the Old Testament together.
He ties it all up.
He doesn't just fulfill a few predictive prophecies, he embodies all the roles.
Give us some examples.
Well, he isn't just another prophet. He is the prophet like Moses who delivers a new law. He isn't just a priest offering animals. He's a priest greater than Aaron who offers himself.
Oh, wow.
He is the cosmic Son of Man from Daniel's visions. He brings the law, the sacrificial system, and the wisdom literature to their intended ultimate end. Everything points to him.
And because he fulfills all those roles, it leads directly into this intense duality he has to hold. He has to be both the revelation of God and the redemption of humanity. The text is completely uncompromising on this point. He must be both. Now think about this for a second. Let's really interrogate this.
Okay.
Why is it so incredibly dangerous, based on the logic of this text, to only view Jesus as a great moral teacher? You hear this all the time. I don't believe Jesus was God, but I think he was a great philosopher who revealed some wonderful truths about how to treat people. Why does the author say that perspective falls drastically short?
It falls short because of the nature of the crisis we discussed earlier,
Oh.
right at the fall. A revealer alone can instruct you, but a revealer cannot save you.
Right.
If Jesus just comes down and gives us a perfect moral code, a flawless ethical philosophy, all he really succeeds in doing is showing us exactly how far we fall short.
He just highlights the problem.
Exactly. He reveals the massive, uncrossable chasm between God's perfection and humanity's brokenness, but he provides no bridge. It would actually be deeply depressing.
Because we know we can't reach it.
Conversely, if he were merely a savior who magically rescued us without revealing anything about the nature of God, we would be saved, but we would be left completely in the dark about who our rescuer actually is.
We wouldn't know God's heart.
No, we wouldn't.
So he has to be the bridge. And to be a functional bridge over a massive chasm, the bridge has to be firmly anchored on both sides.
That's a great analogy. The source argues that to effectively bridge this specific gap, he requires full divinity to perfectly reveal God to us and have the power to save, and full humanity to accurately represent us, act as our substitute, and bear our sin.
Right.
He is the only one who can place one hand on humanity and the other on God and pull them back together.
Which brings us to how he actually rules once that bridge is built. And this is perhaps the most radical, paradigm-shifting concept in the entire manuscript: cruciform kingship.
It's a game changer.
I am completely fascinated by this idea.
It is profound because it completely overturns every worldly assumption we have about what authority and power look like.
Because human kings are brutal.
Right. Human kings, whether historical emperors or modern political leaders, dominate by power, coercion, manipulation, and force. Their authority is built on their ability to make other people bleed for their cause.
Absolutely.
But Christ reigns by self-giving love. His crown is not made of gold. It's won through wounds. The cross is not a temporary interruption of his kingship. It is the truest, clearest expression of how he reigns.
Cruciform kingship means the king bleeds for his people, rather than demanding his people bleed for him.
Exactly.
It's an inverted pyramid of power. And because the king rules in this universally sacrificial way, it makes perfect sense that his kingdom isn't geographically limited.
Right.
The text points out that while he came for Israel to fulfill their specific historic vocation, he came to turn Israel into a blessing for all nations.
Yes. The covenant promise to Abraham finally blossoms globally. This culminates in the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where Jesus claims universal, cosmic authority and then immediately uses that authority to send his followers to all nations.
The whole world.
The scope of his reign is global because the scope of his sacrifice was global.
And this global kingdom operates in that specific time frame we unpacked earlier, the overlapping ages.
The already but not yet.
Yes. The reality that the age to come has decisively begun, even while the present evil age is still thrashing around. We see the evidence of the old age on the news every single night: war, famine, corruption, death.
It is visibly present.
But the theology asserts that the new age of life and restoration has been injected into the bloodstream of history.
And this naturally leads to the final theological pillar the author constructs. What is the king doing in this overlapping time?
Right. What's the current mission?
He is forming a people. The Messiah doesn't just swoop down, save a bunch of isolated, scattered individuals, hand them a ticket to heaven, and leave them to figure out life on their own.
He doesn't just beam them up.
No. He builds a new covenant community. He's a king, and a king by definition builds a kingdom people. He creates the church to be an outpost of the new age in the middle of the old age.
Okay, all of this theology is incredibly fascinating. It has this beautiful internal architectural logic to it.
It really does.
But it's really easy to just sit back, stroke our chins, and get lost in the academic beauty of these concepts. The source material, however, refuses to let us do that.
It demands application.
It insists this isn't just abstract theory. It's not just a theological puzzle to be solved. The author asks the hard question: how does the reality of this Messiah actually alter the mundane, day-to-day life of the listener?
What changes on a Tuesday?
Exactly. What is the practical ripple effect?
Well, the author provides a deeply practical framework outlining several specific areas of life that must be transformed if this narrative is true. Let's look at the concept of faith first. In modern culture, faith is often reduced to a vague, warm optimism that things will eventually get better, or maybe a self-help philosophy you tap into when you're stressed.
Like good vibes.
Right. But the text defines faith as something much more concrete. It is active, unwavering trust in a historical person and his finished work. It's not about how hard you believe, it's about the reliability of the object of your belief.
And if you have that concrete faith, it fundamentally changes what discipleship looks like. This part of the manuscript really hit me hard.
It's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Discipleship is defined here as submitting to a king who has comprehensive, total authority over your private, public, and moral life.
No compartmentalization.
If Jesus is truly the inaugurated king, you cannot partition your life into neat little zones. You can't have a spiritual zone for Sunday morning and a secular zone for the rest of the week.
No.
It would be like a king conquering your entire country and you telling him, okay, Your Majesty, you have absolute jurisdiction over my living room on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
You have absolutely no say over what happens in my kitchen, my workplace, my dating life, or my bank account.
He wouldn't be much as a king then.
A true king demands the keys to the entire house.
That is exactly the level of total allegiance the text is describing. And that comprehensive authority naturally dictates how the source defines worship.
Okay, let's unpack worship.
This is a vital distinction for a modern listener to grasp. Worship, according to this messianic theology, is fundamentally a response.
A response to what?
It is a response to divine revelation and to the historical reality of what the king has already done. It is not, as we so often treat it, an attempt to generate a spiritual experience from below.
Wait, I love that distinction, but let's push on it a bit. If worship is just a response to history, doesn't that make it incredibly dry?
Right.
Doesn't it become just an academic exercise of reciting historical facts? Where does the emotional, transcendent experience fit in? We live in a highly consumer-driven culture, and that bleeds into how we approach spirituality. We want the lights, the music, the vibe.
Of course we do. And the text isn't saying emotion is bad. It's addressing the engine of the emotion.
The engine, okay.
In a consumer approach, you attend a service hoping the atmosphere will manufacture a feeling of transcendence for you. You're trying to work up a spiritual high.
Right.
But the text argues that true Christian worship is messianic praise. You gather to sing, pray, and rejoice because the king has come, because he died, because he rose, and because he currently reigns.
It's rooted in facts.
The objective, immovable reality of history drives the worship. It frees you. It means your worship is valid and true based on what Christ did, not based on your subjective emotional state on any given Sunday.
That actually takes so much exhausting pressure off the individual to feel perfectly spiritual all the time. The reality is true whether I feel it or not.
Exactly.
Now, we have to talk about the implication for suffering, because if you adopt this messianic worldview, it requires a massive paradigm shift in how you process pain.
It truly does. The text points out a very uncomfortable but profound truth.
Yeah.
If the Messiah's own path to ultimate glory passed directly through the agonizing suffering of the cross, then his followers should expect to encounter trials.
Suffering is not a glitch in the system.
No, it's not.
Meaning, if I am going through a terrible, deeply painful season, a health crisis, a financial collapse, a broken relationship, it doesn't automatically mean God is angry with me.
Right.
It doesn't mean I didn't have enough faith or that God has abandoned me.
Precisely. It provides a robust, incredibly durable framework for endurance. The secular world tells us that suffering is a meaningless anomaly that must be avoided, medicated, or escaped at all costs.
Just get away from it.
But the messianic trajectory tells us that suffering, while painful, is not meaningless. In the hands of a crucified king, suffering is often the very road to ultimate restoration. It aligns us with him.
That is a completely different way to live.
It changes everything.
And the final practical implications the author draws out are mission and hope. Because if his lordship is truly universal, it requires universal proclamation. We can't keep it to ourselves.
And our ultimate hope is fiercely anchored in the fact that this king, who came in such profound humility the first time to deal with sin, will absolutely return in unmistakable glory to finish the job and make all things new. VE Day is coming.
VE Day is coming.
But, the author is deeply realistic about human nature. Because these implications are so absolute and so demanding of our entire lives, we constantly try to water them down.
Oh yeah, we want the easy way.
We try to domesticate the king. And so the manuscript dedicates a significant section to explicitly warning the reader about several modern pitfalls or danger zones we easily fall into.
Let's navigate those danger zones because they are incredibly relevant. The text highlights 5 common misunderstandings that distort who the Messiah is.
Okay.
The first massive danger zone is reducing the Messiah to our political categories. And I want to be very careful and explicit here because the source material goes out of its way to maintain strict impartiality on this issue.
Well, it doesn't take sides.
The author states plainly that Jesus is not simply a nationalist leader for any country. He is not a mascot for a political party, and he is not merely a social or revolutionary reformer.
It is a vital warning. We constantly attempt to draft Jesus into our preferred modern political camps. We want him to endorse our platforms.
Whether left or right.
Exactly. But the text argues that the Messiah surpasses and actually sits in judgment over all human political categories. His kingdom is deeply real, and it has real-world implications, but it cannot be reduced to or achieved by the levers of earthly political power.
Why are we so tempted to do this?
Because we want immediate earthly comfort. We want a king who will lower our taxes, secure our borders, and defeat our geopolitical enemies today, rather than a king who looks at us and demands our own personal repentance.
The second danger zone the text warns about is separating his humanity from his divinity. We explored this deeply with the bridge analogy.
Right.
If you deny his humanity, he has no right to represent us. If you deny his deity, he has no power to save us. You lose the bridge entirely.
The third pitfall is treating the cross as a failure or a tragedy, which we've thoroughly debunked, using the author's logic of the cross being the actual throne of victory.
Yeah, we covered that. What's the fourth?
The fourth danger is fascinating, overlooking the Old Testament. The author warns that a detached Jesus is a fundamentally distorted Jesus.
Distorted how?
If you unmoor him from the covenantal history of Israel, from the promises to Abraham and David, you end up with a generic, ethereal spiritual guru instead of the promised historical king.
We just want the nice quotes.
We often do this because we want the easy, comforting grace of the New Testament without having to grapple with the weighty, complex, and sometimes bloody historical context of the Old Testament.
But you can't have one without the other.
No, you cannot have the climax of the story without reading the first half of the book.
Which leads to the final and perhaps most convicting danger zone highlighted in the text, expecting glory without obedience. The author states very pointedly that mere admiration is not enough.
That's a strong statement.
I want to throw this to you. Of all these dangers, why does the author emphasize that simply admiring Jesus falls short? What is so dangerous about admiring him?
Because admiration is safe.
Safe.
Yeah, admiration keeps you entirely in the driver's seat of your own life. You can deeply admire a historical figure, you can admire a brilliant philosopher, and you can still retain complete, absolute autonomy over your decisions.
You just pick and choose.
Exactly. You take the advice you like, you nod at the profound quotes, and you discard whatever asks too much of you.
Wow.
But a king does not ask for your admiration. A king demands your total allegiance. True faith, according to the source, is not applauding Jesus from the audience. It requires submission, repentance, and a yielding of the self to his authority. Allegiance costs you everything.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We have traced this incredible cosmic blueprint. We started in eternity before the foundation of the world was even laid. We moved through the messy, heartbreaking, beautiful reality of human history, the covenants, the failures of kings, the trauma of the exile.
And we arrived at the incarnation.
Yes, we explored the shocking paradox of the cross as a throne, the ultimate triumph of the empty tomb, and finally what it actually means for your daily life, your discipleship, your worship, and your suffering.
If we were to synthesize this entire deep dive, this entire manuscript, into a single thought, the promise became a person.
The promise became a person.
The centuries of hope became flesh and blood. The eternal Son stepped into time, not to observe our brokenness safely from a distance, but to absorb it and redeem it from the inside out.
The text leaves us with a very simple yet universally disruptive Christian confession. Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And because he has successfully entered history, salvation is fully accomplished, history has a definitive center, and the future of the cosmos is absolutely secure.
It is the ultimate plot twist. And it is the only twist that makes the entire sprawling story of the universe finally cohere.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something for you to seriously mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Okay.
It builds on that profound concept the source introduced. the age to come breaking into the present.
Right, inaugurated eschatology.
Yes. The text tells us that the Messiah has brought the future into the present, meaning this entirely new age of the kingdom has already definitively begun, right here, right in the middle of our chaotic, broken, exhausting world.
Thor started.
So if history has already entered its climactic phase, and if the king is already actively reigning from that throne, how does that change the way you look at tomorrow morning?
That's the real question.
When you open your eyes and your feet hit the floor, are you living as someone trapped behind enemy lines, desperately waiting for a rescue ship to finally arrive? Or are you living as a citizen of a kingdom that has already definitively won the war, even if the final localized battles are still raging outside your window?
That changes your whole perspective.
Remember the book analogy from the very beginning of our conversation?
Yeah, the plot twist.
You aren't just a passive reader of this book anymore. You are a character living in the chapters being written after the great plot twist. Act accordingly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the arrival of the promised king. We'll see you next time.